Today, we're diving into the absolutely chilling story of Dr. Thomas Neil Cream. Now, on the surface, this was a highly educated, respectable physician right in the heart of Victorian London. But underneath that professional facade was one of the most methodical and cold-blooded serial killers in history.
I mean, that's the question that absolutely terrified an entire city. How could a man who took an oath to heal people become a master of murder? How could he use his own medical knowledge as his weapon of choice? Well, let's uncover the truth behind the man they called the Lambeth Poisoner.
So let's set the scene. We're in London, the autumn of 1891. The district of Lambeth, a really impoverished area, is suddenly gripped by a series of agonizing, mysterious deaths. And the victims? They're young, vulnerable women, all killed by some kind of fast-acting poison. There's a predator on the loose, and nobody, not a single person, suspects he's a doctor. And this, right here, is the core of the whole twisted mystery. Dr. Cream was living this shocking double life. By day, he played the part of a model citizen. Educated at top universities, a man of medicine, went to church. But by night, he was stalking the city's underbelly, preying on sex workers and other women he clearly thought were disposable. And that contrast, that Jekyll and Hyde act, is what made him so terrifyingly effective. The speed of his final killing spree is just chilling. Think about this. In just 6 months, he murdered at least 4 women and tried to kill another. His method was always the same. He'd meet them, offer them what he claimed were pills for some minor ailment, and then just leave them to die in the most horrific agony. Make no mistake, this was not random. It was a systematic campaign of terror. So what was his weapon? Strychnine. As a doctor, he could get his hands on it no problem. And the effects? They were just brutal. It causes these violent, excruciating convulsions where the muscles seize up completely. It was clever in a horrifying way, because coroners back then often mistook the symptoms for something like epilepsy or even tetanus. And in an era where the deaths of poor women were barely investigated, his medical knowledge gave him the perfect cover. But the terror in Lambeth? That wasn't the beginning. Oh, not even close. To really get a handle on Dr. Cream, we've got to rewind and go across an ocean. Because before he ever stepped foot in London to kill, he'd already left a trail of death in Canada and the United States.
Yeah, his trail of crime starts way back in 1877 with the very suspicious death of his own wife. From there, he moves to Chicago and murders several women using pretty much the same methods. He was actually caught and sent to prison in Illinois. So the real question you have to be asking is, how on earth did a convicted murderer get out of a U.S. prison and end up free to kill all over again in London? And this is what's so wild. You look at his background and it just doesn't compute. Cream came from a good family, a wealthy family. He was a brilliant student, graduating from one of Canada's top medical schools, pursuing advanced training in the UK. He had every single advantage in life, which just makes his spiral into pure evil all the more chilling. And here's your answer. So he gets a life sentence for murder in Chicago, but he barely serves any of it. His family's money and influence, almost certainly through bribes to powerful political figures, got him an early release in 1891. He served just a fraction of his time. The moment he was out, he got on a ship, sailed for London, and got right back to killing. Now, Cream wasn't just a murderer, he was an extortionist too. And you know what? In the end, it was his own staggering arrogance, his belief that he was smarter than absolutely everyone, that led police right to his front door. I mean, just look at the sheer audacity of this. So get this. After he murders Alice Marsh and Emma Shrivel, he starts writing these anonymous letters to prominent men, including other doctors, accusing them of the crime and demanding money to keep quiet. He was literally trying to frame innocent people for his own murders. It was an incredibly high-risk game that was about to backfire spectacularly. Those blackmail letters were his undoing. A Scotland Yard inspector named Jarvis started connecting the dots, and this is where it all starts to unravel for Cream. First, Jarvis traces the letters back to him. Then, a survivor of one of his poisoning attempts, a woman named Nellie Harvey, positively identifies him. Boom! Police then exhume one of his victims, and sure enough, they find the strychnine. The final nail in the coffin, Jarvis confirms that this Dr. Thomas Neil is in fact a convicted murderer from America. The net had closed. So, with a mountain of evidence stacked against him, Cream's case goes to trial at London's famous Old Bailey courthouse.
And what happened next was one of the swiftest, most decisive verdicts in the court's entire history.
15 minutes. That is all it took. Seriously, after hearing the testimony from survivors, seeing the damning evidence from his own letters, and listening to the chemical analysis, the jury needed almost no time at all to decide his fate. It was a stunningly quick end to a reign of terror that had spanned 2 continents.
His defense was just laughably weak. He pleaded insanity, and then he tried to sell this wild story that a lookalike, a double, had committed the murders in London while he was supposedly still in prison in America. It was ridiculous. Nobody bought it for a second. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to hang.
But you'd be wrong if you thought the story ended with his conviction, because his execution, well, that gave birth to one of the most enduring and most debated myths in the entire history of true crime.
Okay, so picture this. November 15th, 1892. Cream is standing on the gallows at Newgate Prison. His executioner, a man named James Billington, later claimed that as the trapdoor swung open, Cream started to yell, "I am Jack the," and was cut off mid-sentence. The implication was electrifying. Was the Lambeth Poisoner confessing to being the infamous Jack the Ripper?
So was he? Let's just clear this up right now. The answer is a definitive, absolute no. The facts just don't line up. The Ripper murders took place in London in 1888. And where was Dr. Cream in 1888? He was locked up tight in Joliet Prison in Illinois. It's completely impossible. Not to mention, their methods were polar opposites: poison versus brutal mutilation. The story makes for great folklore, but it is pure fiction.
So why do we still talk about Dr. Cream today? Because his case was this huge flashing red light for Victorian society. It exposed just how easy it was for a man with medical credentials to get his hands on deadly poisons. It put a massive spotlight on how the deaths of poor, so-called unrespectable women were so often dismissed by the authorities. And, most importantly, it was a terrifying demonstration of how the most evil monsters can hide behind a mask of respectability. And that leaves us with a final, really unsettling thought. Dr. Cream used his status, his trust as a professional, as a weapon. His story forces us to ask a question that's just as relevant and chilling today as it was in Victorian London. How many monsters are out there hiding in plain sight?